The McAlvany Weekly Commentary, covering monetary, economic, and geopolitical news events.
You need stable carriers in order to accommodate human creativity, and you need freedom to accommodate human creativity. But human creativity manifested by art and enterprise and all the great feats of the human spirit, echoing in the image of our Creator, is really the foundation of all value.
Now here are Kevin Orrick and David McAlvany.
Welcome to the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. I'm Kevin Orrick along with David McAlvany. Our guest today, George Gilder, has written a fabulous book, a piece called The 21st Century Case for Gold, a new information theory of money. And what he does, Dave, he brings something that we have considered as sort of an ancient standard, the gold standard, into the 21st century and says this is how we can reestablish a stable measuring line for transactions.
And he does bring a healthy transactional layer into it in the digital era. So one of the things that I like about this is I've read it 3 times. And sometimes when I come across something, I like it because it's fresh.
Right.
And this certainly had elements of freshness to it, even though gold information theory, as you and I discuss it, and some of the elements are not unique to our conversation. This brought them all together in a very unique way. Page 38, he says that money must be the measure rather than what is measured.
Right.
He discusses surprise as both the measure of freedom and a criterion of creativity. And what George is after, if you look at all the books that he's written, is this theme of freedom, of creativity, of the prerequisites and the environment in which good things happen. How do we flourish as human beings? How do we create? What is our incentive to create? What is the role of law? And just the elements, again, of what makes, frankly, the capitalist experiment work.
Well, and what is a just weight and a just measure, like the Bible talks about? You know, you have to have a measuring stick. If I'm building something, Dave, and I've got a yardstick made out of rubber, and it sometimes stretches or it sometimes gets smaller, I'm going to build an awfully funny-looking house, let's say. And that's really what flexible currency and central bank-controlled money really is. Now, I want to jump to this, though, because, all right, I'm 52 years old, and my son keeps saying, Dad, when are you going to talk about Bitcoin? You need to talk about Bitcoin. And I've had a sort of a hesitancy there because I don't see Bitcoin as gold, but George seems to tie the two together.
Well, and you know who else does is Charles Vollum, our friend Charles Vollum at pricedingold.com. His affinity for Bitcoin, I think as a programmer, is his same affinity for gold. He understands the nature of time as it relates to these two elements, and he does a good job of explaining it.
Controlled scarcity.
That's right. Time is remorselessly egalitarian, George says, distributed with rough equality to rich and poor alike. And he brings time as an element into understanding the value of money, the role of money in an economy, what it needs to be as a carrier of information.
Right. I was talking at dinner at Father's Day with my family, and I said, you know, I can't imagine storing our family's wealth in Bitcoin, and I probably never will. I'll do that in gold. But for transactions on the internet, I can't really send a gold coin to whoever I'm buying from. So there seems to be a complement there, but I want to read something before you go to the interview, Dave, on page 35 of Gilder's book, The 21st Century Case for Gold. Here's what he says. Bitcoin is not a competitor to gold, but an internet money that simulates the properties of the monetary metal and offers a path toward a gold-inspired standard for the internet.
Right. He also says gold and digital currencies converge to provide a new solution to the enigma of money. I think one of the things that I love about the conversation relating to Bitcoin is that it's the first time in many generations that there has been an in-depth exploration and curiosity about the nature of money.
Right.
Because everyone lives with the presumption that central banks do what they do with our best interest in mind, with interest rates set at 0, looking at the consequences of removing time, that is the time value of money, from the equation and trying to manipulate the economy and our response as a result. We now have people thinking, wait a minute, this whole managed process, is it really ideal?
You know, I was meeting with a 15-year-old young man a couple of years ago, and he was explaining Bitcoin for the first time to me. And as I listened to him explain, I could hear the yearnings of a gold bug, even though he didn't quite understand it. Shame on our generation and the generation before us for handing the monopoly power over to central banking using Keynesianism or monetarism as an excuse.
Well, George Gilder takes nearly an entire bookshelf in my library, and he might, in fact, take up an entire bookshelf if he keeps on writing as prolifically as he has. Author of 14 books, including an international bestseller.
I think it's 17 books.
Then there's 3 that I don't have, and we'll fix that at the end of the interview. You've written on economics, you've written on political issues, you've written on education and family and technology and more. And, of course, your comments can be found in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and National Review and other places. You've been involved in creating the Discovery Institute and contributing to the American Principles Project. Well, we welcome you to our commentary this morning, George.
Thank you.
We will consider gold today, which is consistent with the title of your recent monograph, The 21st Century Case for Gold, A New Information Theory of Money. But later in the conversation, we'll also explore Bitcoin, a digital private currency experiment, which is compatible with internet infrastructure, really in the same way that gold has long been compatible with free trade in the global economy. And you argue for the relevance of both, the non-competitive nature of both. So to begin our conversation, let's begin with gold. I mean, anyone with an Ivy League education will tell you it's a barbaric relic. They know that much. Why gold in the 21st century?
Because money is a measuring stick, not a magic wand that the Fed can wave to summon economic growth and turn money into real wealth. Money has to be a measuring stick, and a measuring stick cannot be part of what it measures. And the reason gold has been the classic monetary element through the millennia is that it is separate from what it measures. Gold is really based on the time to extract it. And time is the one element in the universe that can't be changed. It is irreversible. It can't be hoarded. It's equally distributed. It remains scarce. When everything else becomes abundant under capitalism, the pressure of scarcity migrates to the residual resource, and that's time. So any measuring stick, whether money or the kilogram or the second or the lumen, whatever it is, if it's a measuring stick, it's ultimately based on the passage of time. The meter, for example, or the yard or whatever, is based on a frequency, the amount of the wavelength of emission of cesium. Time is really the fundamental scarce element in the basis of a measuring stick and the basis of the value of gold.
You know, A New Information Theory of Money, your subtitle, suggests that money as a representation of wealth is connected to information, is connected to learning. So the listener, just so they can fully appreciate this, wealth is not merely, say, for instance, the Library of Alexandria. There seems to be another element to it. Action seems to be a key ingredient, what you describe as the falsifiable experiments of enterprise. Can you expand on that? Wealth
basically is knowledge. We know that because the Neanderthal in his cave, as Thomas Sowell told us in 1971, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the material resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is knowledge, the growth of knowledge. But it's not just any kind of knowledge. It's a special kind of knowledge that Karl Popper, the great philosopher, defined as falsifiable knowledge. A scientific proposition cannot yield learning unless it can be refuted, unless it's stated in a way that it can be falsified. And capitalism works because its business propositions are experimental tests of an entrepreneurial idea. The business plan can be falsified by bankruptcy, by rejection from the marketplace. So that is why capitalism succeeds to the extent that businesses are not guaranteed, are not subsidized, are not mandated by government, but are tests falsifiable tests that can be bankrupted. And that's why so much of current policy is destructive to wealth and growth, because it prohibits this Popperian process of learning, which is growth. Growth is learning if knowledge is wealth.
I want to ask a question about capital formation, the markets, and free enterprise. We have the currency markets, which are the largest and most active markets on earth today. As you note, trading $5.3 trillion every day, which dwarfs the market of goods and services exchanged by 25 times. Number one, what does it tell you when, as a social commentator, someone who's looked at financial policy, economic policy, what does it tell you when the financial sphere, inclusive of currency exchange, dominates economic activity? And number two, as a consequence, have we shortened our time frames in a way that hurts free enterprise and capital formation?
Well, what happens when the measuring stick becomes part of the market that it's measuring? It becomes self-referential and circular and can't really function to indicate a unit of account or a predictable store of value or an index for measurement. And so what happens is that the horizons of the economy shrink, and you have shorter and shorter term trading dominate long-term investment. And today we have, as the Flash boys tell us, trading in the nanoseconds and the microseconds, which some people say is kind of a perfect market. I say is malarkey. When the index of value is more volatile than the economic activity it's supposed to measure, it's just a shuttlecock in the world economy rather than an actual measuring stick.
You know, what is money? This is a basic question. We've introduced it a bit. We treated this question recently in a DVD by that title, What is Money? I think you've approached it at a deeper level with the consideration of time and relating time into it. Is it sufficient for us to look at the time element in money as that what it takes to extract from the earth? For instance, we were talking about gold, and we know that there is a cost and a time committed to extract a single ounce from the earth, and it's a very high cost, and it is a very intensive time. Is that how we relate time to money, or is there another way in which we might relate?
Now, the reason gold is measured by time is because it nullifies economic advances. In other words, gold becomes more difficult to extract from the ground the more you extract. And so advances in mining technology and seismic gear and exploration algorithms are nullified in practice. It's really happenstance by the increasing difficulty of extracting the gold. So what's left when you cancel out the advances in mining equipment, etc., is the time. That's all that's left. So gold becomes a measure of time. And time is the one element that remains scarce when everything else grows abundant. So time is this appropriate source of the value of money. Money is time in a deep sense. Just as wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, money is time.
Yeah, there is a consistency amongst liberals and conservatives alike who agree on the monopoly power granted to central banks. And they've decided that fiat money, an entirely free-floating system after 1971, is the appropriate monetary system. What is it, do you think, about money that causes liberal and conservatives alike to agree on this monopoly power?
I think it's really the great and mostly wonderful influence of Milton Friedman and other monetarists. But Milton Friedman was the great standard bearer of monetarism. And he believed that in the equation, MV, money times velocity, equals prices times transactions, or essentially GDP, that money ruled. And so the power over money could shape employment and inflation and deflation and growth, and the power of money was so crucial that it deserved to be centralized and governed by democratic rulers represented by the central bank. And so Milton Friedman, until the end of his life, really believed that money was fundamentally a centralized element. And liberals love this. Paul Krugman constantly quotes Milton Friedman to justify the wild, prodigal monetary policies that are now being pursued around the world. But when government controls money, it can determine who gets the money and who gets it first, who gets it most, how much it's going to be worth. But when government controls, it becomes capricious and political, and it stultifies, makes stupid the decisions of players within the economy and shrinks the horizons of economic activity and deters the long-term commitment of capital and capitalism. It all becomes nanosecond flash boy trading.
Let's go back to that equation, MV equals PT. There are a number of classic quotes from the piece you've written. One of them is, velocity is not an effect of psychological forces outside the economy. It is the active means by which economic agents, people, control money. Velocity is freedom. It expresses the public's appraisal of economic opportunities and opportunity cost. And then you go on to say, if we control money, it means that money does not require a sovereign source. It can reside outside the political system. It does not need central bank management. Velocity is freedom runs in stark contrast to Milton Friedman, who was assuming that velocity does not represent freedom. Velocity is static. It is constant. It is predictable. It is one number. So it seems that this is where Friedman was wrong.
Yeah, Friedman has been proven wrong by the experience of the last 50 years, where velocity has been anything but a constant. And so, the money supply doesn't rule unless velocity is unable to nullify it. Velocity is the turnover of the dollars, how fast the money turns over, how fast we spend it or invest it or lend it or commit it. And Milton Friedman understood it at the end of his life. In 2003, he did an interview with Financial Times in which he essentially said that if he had to do it over again, he would not stress the money supply the way he did.
It's tough to acknowledge that as a Nobel laureate, having received the prize for the work that you did on the money supply, to say, oops, that was what I got wrong, but thanks for the prize anyways. There is this transition among central bankers from an emphasis on money supply to velocity. And rather than give up monopoly power in the face of failure, the preference is to reorganize and change emphasis. We've been discussing this in terms of research done by Michael Woodford at Columbia, Ken Rogoff at Harvard, and others that like the idea of a cashless society as a means of influencing velocity. Now, perhaps they would say it differently, but in an era where control of the money supply has failed to stimulate economic growth and velocity has continued to decline, currency with something of a sell-by date is attractive to central planner types, and basically a system of debits and credits versus even fiat money, which you can still stuff into a mattress. They're attempting at this point to construct a monetary policy which holds on to MV equals PT with more emphasis on velocity and the reduction of essential freedom, forcing economic activity by looking and focusing on V. What would you suggest as we consider sort of the retrospective on the gold standard?
Well, I think that essentially they want to manipulate interest rates. They want to have negative interest rates. They want to expand the power of central banks rather than limit them to compensate for all the failures of using the money supply as a magic wand. They want to use the money supply plus interest rates plus other restrictions on money to further the controls. And what this does is remove the information properties of money. As Hayek, who was no fan of gold, declared that money is really an information function. And if it can't perform its functions as a measuring stick and as a source of information about markets around the world, markets shrink and become mere trading centers, as we now see. And with this scandal of money, of international currency trading, which dwarfs all other forms of commerce in the world, and yet doesn't even provide a stable index of account or store of value or anything. It can't measure commerce because it's a particularly volatile kind of commerce itself. Gold and Bitcoin, as I say, Bitcoin is the internet gold. It began as BitGold, and it's a distributed global money like gold, and it's suitable for internet commerce. And it will be a new transactions layer for the internet. The internet has 7 layers. This is an 8th layer, a transactions layer that can conduct micropayments on the internet and clean up the internet from its current chaos of hustles and free goods that are spuriously free and baits and switch. All this chaos of commerce on the internet can be ordered by creating a real transactions function through Bitcoin or some other new transactions layer on the internet. And I think Bitcoin has the lead, but there's lots of innovation going on in payments on the internet. But all of it really reflects this insight of the Bitcoin people. Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous Bitcoin man, focused on time. He said Bitcoin had to be a measure of time. It had to cancel out technology, just as gold cancels out technology.
So this was a part of your intrigue with Bitcoin. It shares the properties essential for money. You have authenticity, you have reliability, and you argue that this is the source of the value of money with gold, again, reflecting the necessary qualities, those of authenticity and reliability. You suggest that Bitcoin has those qualities as well. So money then becomes an index for time?
Yes, it's based on the passage of time. Anything can be accomplished with unlimited time. If you can really manipulate interest rates, which is the time value of money, if entrepreneurs don't have deadlines and constraints in their accounts, they can accomplish anything or pretend to accomplish anything until you realize that real economic accomplishment is learning. It's learning curves, which are measured across time. And this is the real measure of value. And if you render money a shuttlecock, just a trading tool with prices more volatile than the actual economy itself, then it can't bear information. It's no longer a source of information. It's just an expression of the power of the central bank and of the political ambitions of a government.
Let's come back to information theory. Information is a surprise, a signal which stands out from mere noise. And let's talk again about the carrier of information in the economy. We know information has to be carried. The carrier should not or cannot contain the news itself. And that really is the problem with fiat money, as opposed to what you've suggested both with Bitcoin and gold as well, that they are a neutral carrier of information.
That's correct. And I really came to this whole theory, for the last 25, 30 years, I've been writing about technology. I've written 7 or 8, 9 books about technology so far. And all modern computer-based and internet-based technologies derive from the information theory of Claude Shannon, an MIT Bell Labs scientist who developed information theory. And I sum up Claude Shannon as saying it takes a low volatility carrier to bear high creative information. Information is surprise in Shannon's model. And creativity is surprise, as Albert Hirschman has argued. Creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it. And planning would work. socialism would work. But information is unexpected bits, as Shannon put it, and Shannon's the one who really invented the bit and the byte, named the bit and the byte, and showed how all communication systems require predictable carriers in order to bear creative surprises. And entrepreneurship is creative surprise. Profits and losses are creative surprises. The interest rate is the predictable average return across the economy, but profit and loss is what Shannon called entropy, surprisal.
So we have the co-opting of the carrier and the corruption of a message when you begin to manage the money system as we have had managed, not only in the form of controlling the money supply, but now setting interest rates and creating an environment where what is known in the financial sphere as financial repression, zero rates, and a redistribution of capital from one party to another. All of this makes sense. You've suggested that return to a gold standard or some sort of system with the same kinds of moorings as the gold standard makes sense moving forward. Help us see how those with political interest and receiving benefits from the existing system acquiesce. How do we go from the system that we have today, broken, but still serving the interests of the powerful and elite, to a better system for all? What's the transition?
Well, the current system isn't working, is it? It's resulting in a widespread demoralization of capitalism, a widespread obsession with unequal distribution of wealth, suspicion toward all establishments, a belief even that technology no longer can confer value, that somehow science and technology have lost their ability to create new wealth and progress. This is sort of the alibi of the left for the Great Recession that they've engineered and extended. And I think that everybody in capitalist societies will benefit from changing the money from a capricious expression of government power and the influence of lobbyists and the desire of bankers to trade a volatile index to a stable source of measurement and value based ultimately in time. I think this is desirable for everybody. Banks are being nationalized. They can't like this for long. They may like it for a little while, but right now, under Dodd-Frank, the big banks are being nationalized and the small banks are being compromised and restricted and finding it more difficult to compete. So, and small businesses are losing energy and creativity. For the first time in a century, the entrepreneurial spirit of America is failing. You know, all measures of entrepreneurial creativity are declining now. And the Chinese are having twice as many IPOs, initial public offerings, as we are, and much more money involved in these initial public offerings. The communists are more entrepreneurial than we are at the moment. Our stock market consists mostly of companies buying in their own shares and buying up the shares of their competitors. This is not working, this current approach. And if capitalists are going to take the initiative again and control the debate, they got to abandon this failed philosophy of modernism that Paul Krugman thinks is wonderful.
And this is really a critical point you're making, because control of the narrative is really what could direct our next monetary experiment. And if it is the Krugmans of the world that define what that narrative is, with the demoralization of capitalism may come the throwing out of capitalism as the failed model. Not because it has in fact failed, but because that's the accusation and the leveling which may be put to the Krugman analysis. Krugman may say, well, you know, what we didn't do is we didn't do enough.
Yeah.
We had the opportunity to print money and we printed trillions, but it should have been tens of trillions. And this, of course, echoes back to Haberstein's nightmare in the 1920s in Germany. It was brilliance. It was the genius of the day which carried the day and carried the argument, controlled the narrative, and caused them to create not only trillions of marks, but also hyperinflation in the process. You did something brilliant. I've looked at the 96 to 98% devaluation of the dollar since the creation of the Fed, and I've looked at that and considered it to be a very powerful factoid, but I've never seen people respond to it. And when I read your example, the lights went on. And as I've shared that with other people, the lights have come on. $1 million fiat currency dollars in 1913 today is worth $20,000.
When the Fed was founded.
On their watch, their tenure, $1 million then today equals $20,000. $1 million in gold in 1913, when they created the Fed, is today $62 million. And you say, aligned with irreversible time, gold is the monetary element that holds value rather than dissipates it.
And I do think that a really valuable new element, a new path, is Bitcoin, because it can become the transactions layer of the Internet, the global peer-to-peer money based on time and thus not manipulable that prevails in Internet commerce. And Internet commerce is becoming, although it's only 6 or 7% now of all commerce, is becoming an increasingly important share of all economic activity. So over time, Bitcoin, which began as BitGold, that's what it is, and its reference to the gold price, which will become increasingly important in the global economy. The Chinese are buying gold in great volumes, and gold is a signal of value. And what gold tells you now, incidentally, is that because of the chaos in the world economy, there's a big flight to the dollar. And both gold and Bitcoin have been devalued recently in relation to the dollar because the dollar is so available and so accessible as a safe haven currency.
You know, coming back to gold and Bitcoin, when you say that they don't compete, how are they complementary in your mind?
Well, gold, is an element, and, it has heft and weight, and it's difficult to chop up. It's difficult to extract from the ground, and it's hard to send across borders. Gold is a real measure of value. It's a wonderful measuring stick, but it's hard to automate. And so now we have BitGold being created, which allows you to extend the rule of gold from the international economy, where it already represents a rough measure of transnational values, to the Internet and automation of transactions across the Internet on a global scale based on the same measure of time, which imparts the value to gold.
So with gold being difficult to automate, Bitcoin extends the rule of gold transnationally and transactionally using the Internet backbone.
That's right. Bitcoin is BitGold, and it's the transactions layer for the Internet that's being created today.
There's a theme that runs throughout, I wouldn't say all of your books, because apparently there's 3 books of yours that I haven't seen. Maybe it runs through them as well. But there is a theme that runs through many of your projects, that of freedom and an authentic expression of that freedom in human action. Is that perhaps your interest also in gold and Bitcoin as an avenue towards expressing human freedom?
Well, certainly human freedom. I certainly cherish that. The real stress in knowledge and power and the 21st century information theory of money is on creativity. You need stable carriers in order to accommodate human creativity, and you need freedom to accommodate human creativity. But human creativity manifested by art and enterprise and all the great feats of the human spirit, echoing in the image of our Creator, is really the foundation of all value.
Well, we thank you for exploring these ideas with us today, elucidating them. I would encourage all of our listeners to read The 21st Century Case for Gold. 90 to 100 pages, very densely written, very well written. a new information theory of money, considering gold in the 21st century, Bitcoin, technological innovations and changes. And this is a part of a larger project, is it not? Your book, Knowledge and Power, isn't this an extension of that?
I hope to incorporate the monograph in future editions of Knowledge and Power. But it all started really with Wealth and Poverty, which was my earlier book that was sort of foundation of a lot of Reagan's policies. Made me Reagan's most quoted living author.
That's right. Well, and what is the best place for our listeners to find both the monograph and if they'd like to order Knowledge and Power or Wealth and Poverty, what is the website you'd like them to go to?
Well, the monograph, as it's called, the money monograph, is www.americanprinciplesproject.com. It's Principles. It's also posted at the Discovery Institute. I'm a Discovery Institute founder fellow there. But this actual project was funded by the American Principles Project and published by them. So www.americanprinciplesproject.com. The book's posted there and can be downloaded.
Well, George, I'm hoping that we can fill out that bookshelf with 17 volumes. There's a couple that I'll get to order today.
I think if you count this monograph, it's 18.
Okay. And are you going to continue to write? Because I'll leave a little room for you there at the tail end.
Yeah, leave some room. I'll be up to 20 shortly. I got 2 more coming.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to having a conversation with you about them. Thanks so much for joining us, George.
Thank you so much.
Freedom. Dave, we were talking last night when we were getting ready for the program about Braveheart. The last thing that he cried was freedom. But actually, applied to money, you could cry
velocity.
Velocity. That's exactly right. Because what is velocity really but the freedom to choose to spend your own money or to save it?
You earn $100, and what do you do with it? Do you spend it? Do you save it? Do you invest it? Do you set it on fire? You can do anything you want with it unless you are being coerced and controlled and told what to do. And that is the notion, the modern notion of what they're going to do in terms of changing emphasis from M to V.
Right.
Velocity may seem like a very dry topic, but it's actually the expression of what we do with our money, an indication of economic freedom.
Well, and like what Gilder said, they're pushing right now for negative interest rates. Well, what is a negative interest rate but a punishment for not spending your money? It's a punishment for saving. Think of the people who are retired right now, Dave, who need to have the time value of their money paid on their deposits in the bank. These guys are saying, no, you're going to spend it and you're going to speculate it, but you are not going to save it.
So if you want to read this monograph, I would encourage you to click on the link next to the interview and download, read it, and pass it along to friends and family members. I think it's a worthy project for a family conversation about not only the nature of money, but also the nature of freedom. As strange as it may seem, MV equals PT is a great lead-in into a conversation on freedom.
You've been listening to the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. I'm Kevin Orrick along with David McAlvany and our guest today, George Gilder. You can find us at McAlvany.com, McAlvany.com. Or you can always give us a call at 800-525-9556.
This has been the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. The views expressed should not be considered to be a solicitation or a recommendation for your investment portfolio. You should consult a professional financial advisor to assess your suitability for risk and investment. Join us again next week for a new edition of the McAlvany Weekly Commentary.